It's not every day a president decides to remodel the White House, but apparently today's that day. Donald Trump has begun demolishing part of the East Wing to make room for a roughly $300 million ballroom, because apparently America needed a place to host the next season of Dancing with the Czars. Politics aside, presidential renovations are nothing new at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The White House has been expanded, rebuilt, and redecorated so many times it's practically America's longest running home improvement show. Part museum, part construction zone, and part presidential playground. Our story begins with Thomas Jefferson, America's first architect-in-chief. When he moved in, the White House was still half-finished and echoey, more fixer-upper than seat of power. Jefferson couldn't help himself. He redesigned the grounds with elegant colonnades and long covered walkways connecting the residence to outbuildings so servants and horses could come and go without disturbing the president's peace. They gave the mansion symmetry and a convenient way to avoid small talk. His passion for architecture came straight from Monticello, his home in Virginia. Jefferson treated Monticello like a lifelong experiment, mixing European neoclassicism with his own brand of American ingenuity. He loved clever design, and he brought some of those ideas with him to Washington. One of his favorites? The revolving dumbwaiter, a little spinning door in the wall that let servants deliver food and wine straight to the dining room without stepping inside. It was efficient, elegant, and perfect for a man who wanted dinner served, but not the conversation that came with it. He also added skylights for natural light, a wine cellar, and an ice house for chilled drinks. In short, Jefferson didn't just expand the presidency. He invented the first presidential minibar. In 1814, the British marched into Washington and decided to leave a calling card by burning down the White House. They torched the building, melted the roof, and left behind little more than charred walls and presidential ashes. Dolly Madison famously refused to evacuate until she saved a portrait of George Washington, because even in a crisis, image matters. When the flames died down, James Madison returned to what was basically a smoldering fixer-upper and said, "We can rebuild." And they did, literally from the ashes, the first of many times the White House would get a hard reset. By 1902, the mansion still wore a full Victorian costume. Heavy drapes, floral wallpaper, and rooms crowded with furniture. Since Queen Victoria had died earlier that same year he took office, Roosevelt figured it was finally safe to get rid of the excessive Victorian frills. He brought in the renowned McKim, Mead, and White. We can call them the Rough Riders of architecture, known for their classical restraint. The result was a White House that finally matched Teddy's taste for strength and order. In Teddy-like fashion, he kicked down walls, rewired systems, and modernized plumbing and electric lighting, dragging the old mansion into the 20th century. And when the dust cleared, Roosevelt unveiled the West Wing, his most lasting legacy that didn't involve charging up a hill. A dedicated space for the president's staff, meetings, and day-to-day operations, finally separating work from family life. Before that, presidents actually worked out of their upstairs living quarters. Imagine Lincoln drafting the Emancipation Proclamation, while little Tad pounded out Yankee Doodle on the piano down the hall. Roosevelt built the West Wing, but William Howard Taft gave it shape. Now, you may be thinking this was a fat joke, but I would not sink that low. At least as low as the floorboards when Taft walked them. Okay, sorry. The shape I'm referring to is the Oval Office. Taft wanted a space that felt both presidential and practical. The White House carpenters took inspiration from the Blue Room's rounded walls, and by 1909, the first Oval Office was complete. It wasn't the one we know today. That came later, after fires and redesigns. But Taft's version set the precedent. From then on, presidents wouldn't just sit at a desk. They'd sit at a symbol. And in Taft's case, preferably one with reinforced legs. We'll now give a brief nod to Franklin D. Roosevelt, who made his own addition. An indoor swimming pool built in 1933 for his polio therapy. It sat beneath the West Terrace, complete with skylights and murals of sea life. It later got covered over to make today's press briefing room. So yes, every question from the press still makes waves. By the late 1940s, the White House had become America's most historic fixer-upper. Floorboards were bending, plaster was crumbling, and the whole place had the structural integrity of a campaign promise. One inspector warned the second floor was about to fall into the first. Not exactly the kind of executive action anyone wanted. So Harry Truman moved his family into an Airbnb while crews gutted the mansion from the inside out. Okay, not really an Airbnb. It was Blair House, just across the street. They kept the outer walls standing but tore out everything within. For 4 years, the White House stood as a hollow shell wrapped in scaffolding. Inside, workers uncovered a literal time capsule. Burnt timbers from the British fire of 1814, fragments from every renovation since, even personal notes left behind by earlier builders. Truman reused what history allowed, strengthened what didn't, and added one new feature of his own, the now iconic Truman balcony. Controversial then, but beloved today. When Truman finally returned in 1952, the White House looked exactly the same on the outside, but everything inside was brand new. Steel frame, reinforced floors, modern wiring. It was, in every sense, the same house rebuilt from within. A fitting metaphor for post-war America. By the 1950s, the White House had its bones rebuilt, and now it was time for gadgets. Dwight D. Eisenhower brought the presidency into the modern era, installing the first television studio, new communications lines, and a phone on the president's desk that could actually call more than the operator. He even had televisions placed throughout the mansion, including the dining room. This made him the first president to doom dinner conversation forever. Thanks, Ike. And when Eisenhower wasn't modernizing communications, he was improving morale by adding a putting green to the South Lawn. Some presidents end wars in conference rooms. Eisenhower ended the Korean War after a round of mini-golf on the lawn. Probably. The White House was no longer just the seat of power. It was the control room of the modern world. By 1961, the White House was sturdy, wired, and kind of dull. Enter John F. Kennedy, and more importantly Jacqueline Kennedy, who took one look around and decided America's most famous house deserved more. She wanted something that would blow your mind. Okay, poor choice of words there. I'm sorry. The Kennedy years also had extracurricular renovations. JFK often used the White House pool for midnight swims, sometimes solo, sometimes with his secretaries nicknamed Fiddle and Faddle. The Secret Service reportedly had a standing drill. If Jackie arrived early, they'd sound the alarm and clear the deck. Proof that the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't the only close call of his presidency. Anywho, Jackie launched a sweeping restoration that mixed history with high society. Antique furniture, fine art, and period decor worthy of a museum, not a mid-century motel. She brought in experts from the Smithsonian, hired French designer Stéphane Boudin, and even created the post of White House curator to ensure future presidents couldn't redecorate on a whim. While JFK handled foreign affairs, Jackie handled interior affairs, and arguably won more battles. She tracked down original pieces from past presidencies, Lincoln's bed, Madison-era chairs, and even uncovered an 18th century fireplace buried under layers of paint. By the time her televised tour aired in 1962, 80 million Americans tuned in to see the transformation. In less than 3 years, the Kennedys turned the White House from a building into a brand, one polished in idealism and tragedy alike. By the early 1970s, the White House had gone from crumbling to glamorous, and Richard Nixon wanted it functional. Really functional. He upgraded the communication systems, expanded the Situation Room, and installed color televisions throughout the building, so the president could keep an eye on the news, and the news could eventually keep an eye on him. He also added a private bowling alley beneath the White House, proof that even presidents need a way to blow off steam. Though in Nixon's case, the real gutter ball was the tapes. A strike against him, and not even his bowling ability could spare him from Watergate. Nixon's most infamous addition wasn't visible, a secret taping system hidden inside the White House itself. It was the only White House renovation that came with built-in self-incrimination, and ultimately led to his resignation. After Nixon left office, Gerald Ford brought the pool back, outdoors this time, giving the presidency its first cabana and one last bipartisan cannonball before the country dried off from Watergate. By the 1980s, the White House was back in the spotlight, and Ronald Reagan, a former actor, made sure it stayed there. He installed new communication systems, introduced the first computer terminals, and added satellite links connecting the White House directly to military posts around the world. His Oval Office decor was pure California, and the Resolute desk got a 2-inch lift to fit his height. In 1987, Reagan also added a new tunnel linking the Oval Office to the White House residence, a secure route in case of a terrorist attack. It was officially for safety, but it probably didn't hurt for sneaking past reporters, or late-night jelly bean runs. Meanwhile, Nancy Reagan oversaw lavish restorations of the Red Room, Green Room, and State Dining Room. And being a Hollywood veteran, Reagan understood lighting. He had the press briefing room redesigned to make it more television-friendly. This came in handy once Iran-Contra hit prime time. Nancy, ever detail-oriented, even consulted an astrologer to schedule the president's appearances. This made Reagan the only world leader whose calendar occasionally depended on Mercury being in retrograde. Clinton's tenure was less hard hat and scaffolding and more Ethernet and email. He upgraded computer systems, improved security networks, and added media facilities to keep up with the 24-hour news cycle. The presidency had never been more connected, or more scrutinized. The White House even launched its first website in 1994. Primitive by today's standards, but a huge leap for a government still obsessed with fax machines. While Bill Clinton was fooling around with Monica Lewinsky, Hillary was redecorating, leading tasteful restorations of the Blue Room, State Dining Room, and Lincoln Bedroom, and adding 20th century American art to the permanent collection. Bill was experimenting with interns. Hillary was restoring the furniture. Both equally time-consuming, but only one improved the White House. By the 2000s, the White House wasn't just a workplace, it was a fortress. After September 11, the Bush administration launched one of the most extensive security renovations in its history. New blast-resistant windows, reinforced walls, and an upgraded Presidential Emergency Operations Center turned 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue into the most secure address on Earth. Bush needed to protect himself from himself. Depending who you ask, he was responsible for 9/11. Bush oversaw a major expansion of national security and the English language. In a 2000 campaign speech, he famously declared, "They misunderestimated me," a word that somehow still isn't in Webster's, though it probably deserves an amendment. The West Wing got a full systems overhaul, upgraded power, ventilation, and communications, all while staff kept working above the noise. He also expanded the Situation Room with digital displays, real-time satellite feeds, and secure video links. Some presidents decorated. Bush upgraded for doomsday. And when the bunker doors closed, Vice President Dick Cheney was usually already down there, as part of continuity of government plans to ensure leadership survived an attack. Or because he just preferred the lighting. By the late 2000s, the White House finally entered the 21st century, kicking and buffering all the way. Barack Obama brought in a full tech overhaul, encrypted networks, new servers, and Wi-Fi strong enough to survive both cyber threats and teenage daughters streaming Netflix. It was the first time a president could tweet from the same building that once struggled with indoor plumbing, and Joe Biden reportedly called it magic airmail. Obama converted the old tennis court into a basketball court, proving he could cross over more than just the aisle, and it became the only place in DC where anyone scored points in years. He was also the first president allowed to keep a smartphone, though after Secret Service finished with it, it could basically send emails and play Snake. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama turned the South Lawn into an organic garden, and the Obamas even brought back solar panels. The White House was finally smart, green, and online. Donald Trump's $300 million East Wing ballroom might be the flashiest White House addition yet. We all knew Trump would go out with a bang. It's practically a presidential tradition at this point. Clinton had interns, JFK had secretaries, and Taft had gravity. Every president claims they'll fix the country. Most of them start with the House.
Welcome to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the so-called most secure address on Earth. Emphasis on so-called, they called it that themselves. Lasers, robots, a moat, and yes, that raccoon in the lanyard. Everything here is on high